what you disagree about.
Okay.
However, perhaps when people aren't as familiar, or maybe not necessarily peer, maybe boss to employee, disagreement here is much harder to detect, I believe.
Then what can we do here? What can we use, or what kind of expressions or communication styles are appropriate when we need to disagree or express disagreement? There are a few cultural tips I would like to share with us here today. First of all, when you express criticism, the better way off is to use indirect or even vague expressions. I'll give you an example. If someone asks you, oh, what's your impression of so-and-so? Instead of saying, oh, he's not at all good, better not to trust him, I think you may just say, well, 他还可以吧, which means he's quite okay, I guess. Or you say, oh, 不大清楚, oh, I'm not too sure about it. So these kind of indirect expressions in China can very well be interpreted or understood as a kind of criticism or a sense of dissatisfaction. Again, another way I think we can express disagreement is to use some other nonverbal expressions. For example, silence. You don't even need to respond to the invitation to a kind of criticism. And another way I think we can do is using the voice, the change of your voice, or even your facial expressions to show some hesitation. So this nonverbal expression of hesitation or this nonverbal expression of silence can very often be interpreted correctly as a kind of dissatisfaction or disagreement. Now, there are many other ways that Chinese people can express their criticism without going very open or going very public.
Sometimes maybe we'll probably nod their heads in agreement behind me, but probably will be cursing my name or disagreeing, muttering in the back.
Wouldn't be that word.
So this is one of the difficulties that I have to overcome here, which is twofold. One is letting my colleagues know that it's okay to disagree with me, and to tell me, whether it be in a crowd, whether it be one-to-one, please disagree with me tactfully, and I'm not going to be ashamed of losing face. I think it's valuable to be wrong, to learn from your mistake. Probably a little bit embarrassing as well.
Yeah.
So this is a constant learning challenge here on how to detect that my colleagues are disagreeing. And the second part, I said it's twofold, is actively looking out for the signs of disagreement. And I'm still working on that.
I think in a way, I also try to suggest people not only listen, but you really need to watch. Listen to the words, but watch for the non-physical elements, looking for the body language to see whether it is a real yes or no. And it's not an easy task. As you say, a challenge.
It is a challenge.
A big challenge.
But I think you raise a very good point, which I think is true about many things in China, in that things are not direct. In all aspects, people are more indirect, and you have to consider exactly as you said, not just the verbal, but the ritual, the non-verbal, whether it be in disagreeing, whether it be in giving gifts, whether it be in communicating with people or agreeing or complimenting. All these aspects require a lot more attention here in China. And I think another important part as well is, as a foreigner here, to realize that because there's this difference in culture, that when you disagree with someone that's local, particularly if you're in a large crowd, not to be direct. It
Good
really
point.
is about face.
Good point.
We also need to learn how we receive a criticism in China. Again, the Chinese people are not very used in this cultural environment to very open and direct criticism. So if they are confronted with an open and direct criticism, you may very often encounter a kind of defensive mode from them. And people may give you some excuses for the things they have done wrong, Or another way I think people react to criticism here that you very often can see is a kind of over-apologetic tone. They may say, oh, excuse me, again and again, and in a much more elaborate apologetic expressions than you are used to in America or in some other parts of the world. A few exceptions I want to remind here is that in China, on the one hand, we are talking about this avoidance of direct criticism, the avoidance of criticizing somebody in front of the public. On the other hand, you may see, wow, sometimes you do come across confrontational situations. People do criticize each other without hesitation at all. When that can happen, when that kind of open criticism can happen in China, very often, when the senior person needs to criticize a junior person, they tend to be more direct and much more open in their expressions. And also, if you come into the service industry, so now, what can we do in order to express criticism in an effective way without committing any cultural taboos? Here, I think we can say, try to be diplomatic in the way you express yourselves in criticism. And also try to be indirect, using some indirect expressions rather than direct expressions. Another thing we can do is to avoid criticizing anybody in front of other people. So if you do have to criticize someone, try to do this in private, one-to-one, rather than in front of the third party. I think that brings us to the end of the session. And thank you for being with me for this session. And I look forward to seeing you again next time. Bye-bye. Welcome back with me today again. Now we are still continuing with our Chinese Business Culture series. And today we are going to focus on how to express and receive sympathies in Chinese and in the Chinese cultural environment. I think the causes for sympathy are quite universal. In the West, we express our sympathies when someone is sick, or you hear about some health problems of your friends or your relatives, your colleagues, and also we show sympathy when someone is dead or experience certain misfortunes, accidents, etc., etc. In China, I think all these causes also stand. These are also the good reasons for you to express your own sympathy. But the way we express sympathy can be quite different here in China. In many countries in Europe, we very often use a sympathy card. And they are readily available in many shops, supermarkets, drugstores. You can get a sympathy card and send it by signing it. And it's a very good and common practice in expressing sympathies. However, in China, the use of cards is not that widespread yet. And it's not part of the Chinese culture at all. Even though nowadays in big cities, and because of the westernization going on here, you can also get the cards from some of the modern supermarkets too. It's not widely used. So how do Chinese people express their sympathy then? What's the channel? And people still prefer a kind of person-to-person expression. So you normally need to express your sympathy or your concern when you meet one another face to face. What are the common expressions you can use when you express sympathies in Chinese? There are quite a number of them. The most common ones include 很遗憾,很可惜, or you can say 听到这种消息我也很难过, 或者说希望你很快康复, or you can say 多保重吧. And with a case like someone has just passed away, you can say to the relatives or to the friends of the person who just passed away, like 请节哀. So 节哀 means try not to be over sad and take care of your own self. There are a few very common and simple ways you can accept the sympathy. For example, you can say 多谢了. Thank you very much. Or you can say 谢谢你的关心. Thank you for your care and concern. Or you can say, oh, please don't be bothered, or please don't trouble yourself with my situation. In Chinese, it's very simple. Just say 不必挂念 or 不必挂记. Learning a few expressions in Chinese to show your sympathy or receive the sympathy expressions will help you along in this kind of situation if you ever come across them. There are a few cultural tips I really want to remind us here as well. And the extent or the methods you show sympathy can really matter greatly in a business relationship.
In fact, just a few weeks ago, the mother of one of my colleagues passed away. So that's something that I had to figure out, what do I do? What I saw from my colleagues was not very much. I think people, people obviously knew because they said that her mother had died. But I didn't notice much talk about the fact. And when I went and expressed my sympathy to her, then I just did it in a very quiet way, so it wouldn't bring attention to her.
I see. So people in your office, the Chinese staff, seem to be very quiet about it. And
Sure. Yes.
Did you see any sympathy cards written or passed on to you and asked you to give to this particular person?
No, I didn't.
No?
No.
I see. So any flowers were bought or these kind of things you are so accustomed to in the West. Any of these things going on here?
Well, a few months ago, when a different colleague's grandmother died, I had asked about would it be appropriate to get flowers, and they said, well, yeah, that would be appropriate, but in this case, a couple weeks ago, I didn't hear anyone in the group initiate something to express sympathy like that, and I've never seen a sympathy card go around the office.
Actually, I was in a conversation with a person from the West just a while ago, and I was asking the question, if the spouse of your colleague was sick in hospital, very sick in hospital, would you like to make the effort as the manager or director of this company to go and visit the spouse of your colleague? And the person answered me, my friend answered me, no, I don't think it's appropriate. I thought, and he even went ahead and saying, it sounds like a little bit protruding or invading into another's private world. But the same situation in China will be handled and viewed very differently. I think among the Chinese people in a company, if you are the boss or if you are the manager, I think it's only a great credit you are earning to yourself if you make the effort, go and visit the spouse of your colleague in hospital, go to the hospital and pay this visit even to the spouse of your colleague will be very much appreciated. And you'll be viewed as a person with a good heart, 好心肠的老板, a very good boss. And that kind of gesture will really lend a lot of strength to your management, to your leadership, and to the good image as a boss. Well, this story actually only reminds us across the cultural boundaries, the way we express our sympathy, the things we do to show our sympathy can be culturally determined and culturally interpreted.
Because I do remember when I was working with my own Chinese colleagues, and if things of this kind happened, and they were more noisy about it, and more activities going on. They even organized, I think, some groups and automatically to go and pay visit to the family of, the family of the person either passed away who was sick.
If the person was sick in hospital, they constantly, went to visit the person in hospital too. A lot of things going on if it is really in a monocultural environment. So we can see things can be challenging.
Some things can be happening that you aren't aware of as well.
You may not be aware
Yes.
of it. Other kinds of sympathies or other kinds of things you have also observed here, Paul.
I've seen where someone is in the hospital that people will express something either by email or or if they're sick, they might say get well soon or something like this. So there might be a verbal expression or some type of expression, or best wishes for a person in that way.
So, as the old saying goes, do as Romans do. Why don't we, before we come to China, familiarize ourselves with some of the common expressions you can use when you express sympathies or receive sympathies, or why don't we try to learn the cultural tips as what are the best things to do in order to show my sympathy sincerely and appropriately in this land, the Chinese cultural environment. I'm sure with your effort made on that side, before you come, you will find yourself much more at ease with your Chinese colleagues and with the Chinese people at large when you are here in this land, the land with a rich culture. Okay, now we come to the very end of this session, and I'm looking forward to seeing you again for the next session. Thank you, and bye-bye. Hi, welcome back with me again today on this Chinese Business Culture series. And today, the topic will be asking and offering help in China. We are looking at the way the Chinese people ask and offer help, as well as refuse or accept help.
When we first arrived to Beijing, one of the colleagues took it on himself. We had actually hosted him in the U.S. One of the colleagues took it on himself to make sure we were met at the airport, and then he and his wife spent the next couple of days making sure that we got our cell phone and things like this. So that was just offered to us as a way to help us get settled.
I think that being a host, or this kind of a tradition of being a good host, is very much part of the Chinese culture here.
Yes.
And they are so used and so skillful in playing the role of a host to
Yes.
visitors.
And it's really appreciated that to have that type of help. I know on numerous occasions when the phone rings or someone needs something and I don't speak Chinese very well, one of my colleagues is always quick to help if I ask for it. So that's very nice. But what I find is very interesting is it's not very often that I find them asking for my help. Another thing I think I wanted to remind us about this help giving and receiving is the particular Chinese way of offering help before asking for permission. However, in China, if the same situation happens, I'm sure this person, if he or she happens to be a Chinese person, if I ever offer this help and going down together by giving him or her an arm or an arm, I'm sure what I will get is thank you, 谢谢, that's very kind of you, 你太好了. So be careful, even if you, out of your kindness, you want to help, but across the cultural borders, you have to know what are the cultural values behind each action. Also, what are the cultural values behind your way of help. Normally, whatever you ask, so long as a help you are in need of, please use the Chinese word 请 before your request. 请 means please. You can also say 请你帮个忙 means please help me, please lend me a hand. Sometimes
And you can start your request for help by saying 真不好意思. That means I'm so embarrassed to ask. 真不好意思，实在需要你帮一下忙. I really need your help. Okay. Or you can just, for simple help, for example, asking for